Erev Tov and welcome everyone. I'm so grateful for you all being here and for this opportunity to learn with you all. I have been teaching classes of this nature on different topics for almost a decade. And of course, there is so much more. There are lifetimes and lifetimes of Torah. So to be able to capture, what I would think are the most important teachings is impossible. And even to capture my favorite my favorite Torah would be impossible. So what I did instead is I picked a few specific sources from classes that I've given over the year that I think capture principles that I think are very, very important and speak to me, and I hope speak to you as well. If someone said, what are some of those beautiful ideas that Judaism, that it's both in the sources, that it's an important aspect of Judaism, these are some of the ones that I would share, and I think you'll start see some patterns, particularly from the last ones. So again, these are all sources that were part of bigger classes, but hopefully they'll speak for themselves. But the first place, coming from a place of love, is some sources on what love is. And again, this kind of love is not specifically between a man and a woman. In fact, the sources talk about it between King David, before he was king, and the son of his enemy Saul, Shaul, his son Jonathan, Yonatan. So this is truly the love between any two human beings. So Leon, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, and I'll have you take both of these sources. So one is from the Mishnah Pirkei Avot, again about 220 common era compiled by Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and this is the collected philosophy and wisdom of the rabbis, the previous generations. So go ahead, please.
From Pirkei Avot, chapter 5, Mishnah 16, all love that is dependent on a specific cause will disappear once that factor is no longer present. But the love that is not dependent on a specific cause will never disappear.
Excellent. And many people probably have experience with this. Let's talk about the love between a man and woman. If a man only loves a woman because he finds her physically attractive, and then something happens and she's no longer attractive, he's not with her anymore. And the rabbis say that's not true love. If somebody, a gold digger, a woman who only marries a man because he's rich, but then he goes bankrupt and she leaves him, again, she didn't love him, she loved his money. And in the first case, he didn't love her, he loved her beauty. But even regular friends, there are friends who get close in grade school because one of them gets the new video game system, the new Xbox, and he wants to go over to his friend's house and play. And then when he's tired of playing, he says, I don't want to go to your house anymore. Again, he didn't actually love or have any kind of strong feelings for his friend. He just loved playing video games. Now, it doesn't say that these relationships are inherently bad, although some of them can be more damaging. It's just that true love, the kind that is going to last, needs to be a love for the actual person and who they are, including their faults. So that's this first source here. But Rambam, recognizing that there are different ways to relate to a person, and again, if you enjoy hanging out with someone because you want to go to the bar, you want to play golf together, not a bad thing. And he recognizes that there might be different levels of love between people. There's, the highest love that can last anything, and there's people who are friends. So the word love itself, ahava in Hebrew, can connote not just a romantic love, but many ways of relating and connecting to a person. So Leon, I'll have you take the second source from Rambam, who, by the way, this is one of his typical models. He talks about different levels of giving charity, tzedakah, which recognizes that even the lowest level is still a form of charity. It's just not the best. So too with love. He talks about different ways of people connecting. In this case, more man and woman, but you can apply it to many relationships. Go ahead, Leon, source number 2.
There are 3 types of love. Love because of what one stands to benefit from the other, love of pleasure, and love of virtue. Love of virtue is when 2 people desire the same valuable thing, the essentially good, and each one wishes to collaborate with the other in obtaining that ideal for both of them.
Excellent. So the way I would interpret this is that the lowest level, which is ohev toelet, love of getting some benefit out of them. So that might be that I love this person because, I love golfing with them and they have a free membership to the country club. Now, again, that doesn't make you a bad person, but that relationship, you don't really love them. You love what they can do for you. And there's still, you enjoy being with them, you enjoy these things, but ultimately you're not with them for them. The second level, ohev menucha, which is, love of pleasantness, of good, comfort. It's just, feeling good, is you do actually love something about that person. Now, it could be a physical intimacy, but it could also just be their company. They make you laugh. You enjoy being with them for the fun. And that kind of love, you really do love something, enjoy something about that person. And what many say on this commentary of Rambam is that these levels often lead into each other. You might enjoy being with someone because they go to movies with you, et cetera, like that. Then their laugh, their commentary on the movie, you actually enjoy what they have to say about it. But eventually that love can grow into something more, which is this love of virtue, or the highest level, ma'ala, going up to the highest level, which is that each of you realize it's not about you just enjoy being with each other and you can give something to each other. It's that the two of you together can accomplish something that you couldn't accomplish apart. You have a mission, you have a goal. You realize that together you can help each other achieve your true potential, whether it's building a family, running a company, writing a book together, making a piece of art, whatever it is, doing something in politics, that each of you want to bring out the best in the other person. And again, all of these levels truly don't have to be just between man and woman. They can be in any kind of relationship, and they're all valuable, and they can all build off of one another. But if you see someone and say, I can accomplish something in this world only with you, then that is even higher than that person. It's something that will keep you together forever, and it's truly a beautiful thing. So again, any benefit you get from another person, any reason you love them is good. But if you want to really go to the highest level of love, something that will bind you forever, even beyond this world, you have to, strive for something greater. So any thoughts, comments, or questions on this first section?
I just
Leon, please.
One quick question. In the Pirkei Avot phrase above, I have Pirkei Avot here. I remember this phrase, and there were two stories. One was David and Jonathan.
Mm-hmm.
What was the other one again? The other one was the rape of.
It was King David's son and daughter.
Right.
I'm blanking on their names right now, but the whole thing is
their names too.
Yeah, it'll probably come to me at some point in the class. But his son tricked the daughter, I think it was his half sister, and said, "Oh, I'm sick. Can you take care of me?" And then she felt bad for her half brother, stepbrother, went in, and then he had his way with her, and all he wanted to do was to sleep with her. And once he did, he was like, "That's all I needed from you." Right. So again, he didn't want her; he just wanted that physical, one-time thing, and then he cast her off. Again, I'm sure the names will. If someone wants to look them up, I'm blanking on them right now. But that's the other story there. And again, now that I said, even though Rambam says there's levels of love and the lowest level is still love, that's something that's really not love at all. That's damaging love. If you want to go over to your friend's house to play his Nintendo, that's not really going to hurt him. It's just that relationship isn't going to last. But when you want to take advantage, yeah, go ahead.
But then in the second comment, was the love of David and Jonathan two people desiring the same valuable thing, or
yes.
Did he not illustrate it with that example?
It is, and the thing that they wanted was, it was the recognition that David was chosen by God to be king, and Jonathan essentially betraying his own father to save David so that he could ultimately be king. I don't want to say anachronistic. We're putting Rambam's commentary is later than the Mishnah. Right. So it could be that the Mishnah is just saying that if you're willing to do something for somebody, whether you get anything out of it or not, like Jonathan gained, not only did he gain nothing ultimately by saving David, he put his own life at risk by protecting David from protecting David from Jonathan's father, Shaul. You could argue that that's what Rambam is talking about, which is the ultimate mission of making sure David survives to be the king. But I don't want to impose Rambam's commentary on the Mishnah's understanding. But great questions. Yes, the full version of that Mishnah is quite powerful. Excellent. So the next section here is just a short one source thing, and Ed, I will unmute you for that, and nature, and particularly relevant in our world today, especially for those in Milwaukee, Chicago, who smelled the incredibly unhealthy air. And it's a combination of wildfires in Canada, which are exacerbated by climate change, the heat, the dryness, etc. But it's not just the smoke from Canada, it's also the pollution. We are destroying the earth that God gave us. And this beautiful midrash here from the book of Kohel, based on the book of Kohelet Ecclesiastes, makes a very important point. So go ahead, please, Ed.
At the time that God created Adam, he led him past every tree in Gan Eden and said to him, "See how beautiful and praiseworthy are my creations. Everything that I created for you. Be careful not to damage or destroy my world, for if you damage it, there will be no one to fix it up after you."
Yeah, I mean, this is a recognition of what's explicit in the text, that God created the world. And here, perhaps it's a little anthropocentric, meaning we're making it about us humans, that God created it for us, which is a tenet of our religion. But the point here is that if we mess it up, that's it. This is what God gave us. God gave us one world, gave us responsibility, and that's explicit in Bereshit, in Genesis, that God gave us responsibility over the world, not to destroy it, but to be stewards of it. And if we blow it, that's it. God loves us. God gave us an incredible gift, an incredible responsibility. But if we're not responsible and we destroy it, God's not giving us a second chance. And again, that is so relevant today, because right now, not just Jews, but all of humanity, we're blowing it. And the thing that's so frustrating is we keep being given opportunities to slow it down, to take second chances, and we're not doing it. And another frustrating thing is it's not the individuals, you here in this class, who are not recycling or anything like that. It's, you can do a little bit to help, but it's really going to be the big corporations that need to make those changes, and getting them to change is, they're more stubborn than the Jewish people. But the Torah, this is not as old as the Torah, but this Midrash, which is quite old, recognized that we get one nature. God gave it to us, and if we mess it up, game over. And unfortunately, we're not doing so great right now. Any thoughts or comments on this quick source?
It kind of reminds me of when Shimon Bar Yochai comes out of the cave and he starts lasering everything with his vision because he doesn't like that people aren't studying Torah enough. And God's like, "Hey, you're blowing up my creation. I don't care why you're doing it. You're destroying my creation. Don't do that."
I mean, there is a general principle within the Torah, is that even those who are evil, even the Egyptians, God is not happy that God has to destroy them to save the Israelites, because they're still his creation. The rabbis talk about even stepping on an ant. Look, if there's a bug, if a person's allergic to bees and they have to swat a bee, okay, fine, that's to protect themselves. But the rabbis are quite clear. We do not wantonly destroy things. And even if we need to, we should still, be careful about it. Wanton destruction, destruction without purpose, is forbidden by the Torah. Bal tashchit, we may not do it in any case. And even when we do need to kill an animal, cut down a tree, we still have to be hesitant. We have to make sure we need it. And unfortunately, in the world we're in, where, headphones are meant to last for a year maximum, so we constantly are destroying things. It's really counter to the values of both the Torah and certainly rabbinic Judaism. So it's a very important point, is even bad people, even those who are evil, are still part of God's creation. So the fact that God cares for them, all the more so God cares about, the innocent in God's creation. Excellent. All right, our next source here, also a short one. So in terms of, or the question of, is there such a thing as Jewish philosophy? So it depends on who you ask, but, or if you want to say like in the Torah or really early sources, their philosophy, it's not clear, but at some point in Jewish history, there clearly developed a kind of literature that you would call Jewish philosophy, which is the way we think, the way we understand the world. And one of the earlier books, not the earliest was probably Sa'adya Gaon in the 9th or 10th century. But one of the earlier ones was this Rav Yosef Albo, 14th, 15th century, and his book Sefer Ikarim, literally the book of principles, and considered one of the foundational books of Jewish philosophy. What do we believe? How do we approach the world? And one of these beautiful ideas is about the nature of Torah and how it constantly changes and adapts to time. So Gloria, go ahead, please, hear from Rav Yosef Albo's Sefer HaIkarim.
It is impossible that the Torah would have been given in complete form, suitable for every generation, because new situations of human interaction and modes of conduct are constantly arising, and they are too vast in scope to be included in any one book. Therefore, at Sinai, Moshe was taught the general principles orally, things that are hinted to briefly in the written Torah, so that the sages of each generation would be able to extract the newly needed details of practical halacha.
Excellent. So there's this image that the rabbis, or some rabbis I've learned with, have said, is that if every single possibility of, every Jewish law, every situation was included in the original Torah given to Moshe at Mount Sinai, at Har Sinai, the book would be the size of Mount Sinai. Rather, the core text, with its poetry, with its early history, and with with a number of laws, but often given sometimes in vague ways, or as core principles, foundations that you could build off of. That was the core text. But all of the tools, the philosophy, if you were, that was all given in the oral tradition. So this text is not just talking about the flexibility of the Torah to grow and be adaptive, but it also gives authority and said that Moshe was given this set of principles that could be used in every generation to adapt the Torah to the new world that it came into. Now, obviously, there's always a tension in how much should we adapt the Torah. If we've been keeping the laws, this way for 500 years, but now science or philosophy or ethics have changed, how much do we change the Torah? So orthodoxy, in particular, is the movement that's the slowest to make those changes. And there's a benefit to that. That slow process makes sure that it's, everything's very thought out and it's very within the tradition. Obviously, the detriment is that as we progress socially and morally, that Jewish law isn't necessarily keeping up with that. But the point here that's so important to not forget is that Jewish law is meant to adapt, meant to be refined. I'm not even going to use the word changed, but it's meant to be fluid. It's a living Torah. It's a Torah which is alive. And to say the Torah never changes, and this is the exact same laws that we've kept for 2,000 years, and how dare you change one? We're going to dress the same as our ancestors did. First of all, that's a bunch of nonsense. The Jews of Eastern Europe are as different from the Jews of the generation before as we are from them. But if the Torah will not adapt to the world as it changes, then the Torah dies. The Torah has constantly adapted to the world it's in, to the language, to the diet, to the culture, everything about it. And that's the beauty and the strength of the Torah. And that's a theme that I hope will be reflected in the last couple sources, is that the Torah is meant to be open to new ideas. It is not a closed book, and those who treat it that way, who close it off from the world, again, will stagnate and will disappear. So this idea of the Torah being a living document is relevant to so much, particularly in our world where things really move very, very quickly. Any thoughts or comments on this quick source? Beautiful. So I will go ahead and take the next source. So now, this is one that I taught in a class not terribly long ago. It's a relatively contemporary source. It's the daughter, I believe, of Rav Avram Heschel, Avram Yehoshua Joshua Heschel, who marched with Martin Luther King Jr. So he was a proponent of civil rights, of the prophetic vision of all mankind being equal. And his daughter brought this beautiful quote about prayer. Now, this obviously goes in a slightly different direction than where I've been going before, but this is just such an important teaching for those who struggle with prayer, who want to talk to God, but open a siddur and say, this isn't speaking to me. What am I doing wrong? What's going on here? There must be one perfect way. As soon as I find that perfect way, then I'll know exactly what to say to God, and prayer will be fully meaningful. Just tell me what that way is, Rabbi. But then you read this text and it validates all of us who struggle with tefillot, with prayer. There's a specific difficulty with Jewish prayer. There are laws, fixed text. On the other hand, prayer is worship of the heart, the outpouring of the soul, a matter of devotion. Thus, Jewish prayer is guided by two opposite principles: order and outburst, regularity and spontaneity, uniformity and individuality, law and freedom. These principles are the two poles about which Jewish prayer revolves. Since each of the two moves in opposite directions, equilibrium can be maintained only if both are of equal force. So if someone says, I don't care if prayer is meaningful, just say the words in the siddur, that's losing something. But if someone says, what do you need a siddur? Just speak from the heart, there's also something lacking there. The siddur needs our heart, and the heart needs that guidance and being part of the language of tradition. However, the pole of regularity usually proves to be stronger than the pole of spontaneity. Most people default to, if I'm just saying the words in the siddur, that's enough. And as a result, there's a perpetual danger of prayer becoming a mere habit, a mechanical performance, an exercise in repetitiousness, which again, that's what happens in most cases. The fixed pattern and regularity of our services tends to stifle the spontaneity of devotion. Our great problem, therefore, is how not to let the principle of regularity, a set, fixed text, impair the power of devotion, praying from the heart, feeling it, being inspired every time you pray. It's not possible to do that, but it's also not possible to give up the written text. It is a problem that concerns not only prayer, but the whole sphere of Jewish observance. He who is not aware of the central difficulty is a simpleton. He who offers a simple solution is a quack. And I just think that's, in so many ways, anyone who says that the answer is so simple, they write a book and say, all of Judaism is so simple, I can do it for you in 4 pages, they're a quack. But somebody who doesn't realize that Judaism needs to be a studied thing, you spend a lifetime, also doesn't really get what our religion is. But everybody needs an opportunity to discover that for themselves. Any thoughts, comments, or questions on this? Yeah, Ed, please. And then I'll have you read the next source.
Oh, I was just going to say, it reminds me of the tension in modern Orthodoxy between the tradition and secular knowledge. This idea that God exists betwixt and between these two poles. I don't know who said it. It might have actually been a Christian philosopher, but it was something like, if it is knowable, it is not God. God exists somewhere in the middle of these two knowable extremes.
I mean, that sounds like Taoism, the Tao that can be spoken is not the true Tao. So I think every religion has some idea like that, is that the true nature of the divine, I'll just say the divine, can't truly be captured. And because of that, we all live in a tension between trying to be in this world and connecting to the world above. And we have certain tools. So having a set text that we believe is divinely inspired, but then it doesn't always speak to us. But if we only do what inspires us, then we may not actively choose to reach out. If Rambam talks about this in his laws, he rules that if somebody's not in the headspace essentially to pray, that they shouldn't pray. But what's the problem with that? If you only pray when you're in that inspired, focused place, when are you going to pray? How often are people going to pray? Probably never. Most people will never pray. So too, if you say to someone, you need to pray every single day, 3 times a day, how often is one going to be inspired during that constant prayer? And again, the one, as Rabbi Heschel pointed out, that wins is the set prayer. But trying to instill that, again, that living in that tension is what I think all religions need to live in, that tension of trying to go above the world we're in, but always having a foot in it. And when somebody can find not a perfect balance, that's not possible, but within that tension, that's where beauty and inspiration can be found. But you got to be willing to live in it. And it's not easy. And that's the fun of it, the challenge. So I'll leave you unmuted. So this next section here, these sources aren't all necessarily the exact same, but I think they're thematically connected. So I call this section Science, Common Sense, and Progress, which again, this is where my heart really loves. If you've noticed, my classes over the years often tend towards talking about these particular things. Like you said, for my modern Orthodox set identity, dealing with secularism, with secular knowledge, with books, with art, with science, etc., like that. So this first source isn't necessarily a huge statement, a philosophical one, but there's something very important, a principle captured in it. So this is a relatively recent source, 1920s, and it's talking about vaccines. So this is a source that I used in my class on vaccines and whether or not they're obligated. And the section that I brought it up in is whether or not parents can choose for their children to be exempt from getting vaccines. So fine, maybe, adults need to get it, but they can a school can mandate it. But should parents be able to say, I don't care, my child isn't getting it? And then does the school have the authority within Jewish law to say, if your kid isn't vaccinated, they're not coming to school then? And there are parents who say, well, it's my ultimate decision. I can decide what's best for my child. And the response here is, except you're an idiot. So please go ahead, Ed.
The doctor should not act on his own accord, but should consult the other expert doctors of the town, and they should act in accordance with the majority view. By a majority in this connection is meant a clear majority, i.e. a 2/3 majority. The opinion of the father and mother has no effect one way or the other. We do not find anywhere at all in the Torah that parents have a right to endanger the lives of their children by preventing the doctor from treating them.
Excellent. There's 2 actually very important points here. And the first one, for any scientists who are listening right now, is that science is not an absolute perfect truth. The beauty of science is that it's constantly testing itself. And I don't know that scientists love to be proven wrong, but when a scientist finds a theory or a hypothesis and then someone refines it or disproves it, that's the beauty of science, that it's constantly becoming better and more accurate. So there's a recognition here that particularly in medical science, we may never be 100% sure. From a religious perspective, God could come down and say, this is the medicine, you should all be taking Tylenol and not aspirin or whatever it is like that. But from our perspective, medically and scientifically, we go with the well-accepted view. And he doesn't even say generally accepted. He's very clear. If you're going to mandate giving someone a medical procedure, it better be the clear majority. Now, with vaccines, it's a lot more than 2/3 of accepted medical practice. So he's setting a fairly low threshold, kind of a supermajority, but like it's 100%, 99%, if not 100% of doctors who actually pay attention to the science. So that's the first thing, is a recognition that we're never going to be 100% on it. But if you're going to mandate something, better be a pretty clear majority, which again, with vaccines, it's far and away. But then the second thing here is, well, parents always know best, except they don't. But more important than that here, we're not just talking about education. Should they send them to, this school or this school? This one has more Mishnah. This one has more math. This one has more sports, whatever it is like that. We're talking about life and death here. So this ruling is very specific for the Melamed Laho'il, which is that fine, parents do have a lot of, for their children's education, it's a parent's mitzvah, and they can make certain decisions, even if they may not be the ideal one. But when it comes to health, parents have no right to compromise on the health of their children, and the community can absolutely overrule them. And the reality is that the majority of rabbis agree with this. There is an opinion out there that says, well, if parents really don't want to, you can urge them and show them all the sources, but it's ultimately up to them. That's the minority view. The majority view is you can, force is not the word, but you can command them to do so. And if they refuse to do it, they're out of the school. So this is really important, because for all of the debates we have, putting our community and our children at risk is unacceptable. We can have all the debates in the world about how to keep Shabbat, how to keep kashrut, even about men and women's roles in Judaism, which can be emotionally and psychologically painful. I don't want to diminish that. But when it comes to the health of our children, end of story, parents are wrong. You've got to take care of the children's lives. So I think that's such an important thing. And this comes up a lot in medical law, where again, there's certain debates about the nature of food and animals, et cetera, like that. But when it comes to the health of a child or a pregnant mother, we go with what doctors say, even if it's against Jewish law. And that's a general principle, is health, life and death almost always trumps Jewish law, except for 3 very, very extremes. Any thoughts, comments, or questions on that? Excellent. Leon, Leon, you have a comment anyways. Great. I was going to unmute you for the next source. Go ahead, please. Yeah, go ahead.
This raised the question that's roiling the world right now, or the United States right now, about transgenderism. Mm-hmm. The child feels like they should have the sex change surgery, and if they don't, they'll commit suicide. But the parents are opposed to that whole idea. Is that an issue in this according to these principles here, that the parents don't have the right to say no in that case? Yeah,
I think that this is a relevant text. I think there are a few differences here with vaccines when it's like COVID or other diseases. It's much more black and white. Whereas, if they don't get the vaccine, the chances of them getting sick and potentially dying are very explicit. With transgender, it's a little bit more complicated, because the reality is, in these southern states where they're outlawing the surgery for kids under 18, that almost never happens. That just, they're outlawing something that was never done, except for maybe like 1 in a million. So a lot of it is political theater. What they are trying to push against, and this one is where this source might come in, is, psychological help, potentially hormonal therapy, which is often reversible. So the things that could help these children from severe psychological damage, this is less a point about the halachic view. This is more about what people are arguing about with transgender surgery. It's not really what's at stake here. So as you said, if these children are being damaged severely psychologically, which they are by not getting proper care, yeah, then the parents are not doing what's best for their children. And again, if the parents say surgery is a major thing, we're not talking about surgery. No one's doing surgery for a 7-year-old. Maybe there's a rare case of that happening, but I don't think so. We're talking about them getting therapy, about them or some sort of help, or potentially taking hormonal blockers, which again is totally almost certainly reversible, or dressing a certain way. All of these things are not major medical things. So again, that's kind of a separate point, but halachically speaking, yeah, if the child is suffering psychologically and it could be a life or death issue, yes, it would be appropriate to overrule the parents. And again, what we're overruling them in is not what they're opposed to in most cases anyways. Again, the children are not necessarily doing anything that crazy. So that's kind of a class in and of itself, but this would be a relevant text there, which is if the parents' actions are psychologically and potentially physically damaging a child, the community has a responsibility to push back against that. Now, again, this is from the perspective of Jewish law. You come to your rabbi, and the rabbis are not running the government, nor should they. We definitely should not be doing that. But it's a very important conversation. But there are nuances both from Jewish law, but also about what people are actually arguing about. Great question, Leon. So this next source here, in some ways, is related to the vaccine thing, and it's more about people just being dumb about not being responsible and taking care of themselves. And this is also a pushback on certain religious perspectives. I had a friend who, I don't think he ever actually did this, but the joke is that he'd get in his car, he'd say Tfilat HaDerech, the prayer for a journey, and then drive 90 miles an hour backwards, assuming, oh, I said a prayer, so I'll be fine. But there are people, and not just Jews, there are religions who God will, take care of everything. But one can be fully believing in God and recognize that's not the world that God put us in. If the Torah said, as long as you believe in me, I will make sure that no harm will ever come of you and you have Superman powers, people would have realized right away that's not true, and the Torah never would have continued. So this talks about you have to be real and have common sense about the world. So again, this is also relevant to vaccines, but also eating healthy and just making all kinds of proper decisions about our health. So please go ahead, Leon. And again, this book is 11th century and anonymous. We're not entirely certain who wrote it, but it was clearly or fairly clearly written from a father to his son, analyzing the nature of all of the mitzvot. Go ahead, please.
Each person must protect himself from natural harmful happenings. God created the world and built it on the foundations of natural law. Nature decrees that if a large rock falls on a person's head, it will crush his skull, and that if someone falls off a high roof of the ground, he will die. God made it such that the human body is subject to the laws of nature as his wisdom saw fit, and he commanded man to protect himself from danger. This is because nature, which he is a part of, will act upon him if he does not take precautions to protect himself. Consequently, the Torah has commanded us to guard our homes and environs in order that we do not die through our negligence. We may not put our lives in danger and rely on miracles. In fact, our sages say that if a person relies on a miracle to save him, a miracle will not occur.
Excellent. So the mitzvah that's being discussed here is the mitzvah of setting up a fence around one's roof. And this is older houses, back in ancient times that used to have a flat roof that you would basically go up there and you would use it as an attic. You would store barrels up there, and it was still, 8-10 feet off the ground. And if someone falls off, they could die. So they had to put a fence around it to make sure no one would fall off and injure themselves, both the people living there and guests. So that's the context of this mitzvah. But there are stories of, rabbis who, let's say they're taking a medicine they really need to take for their health, but it might have potentially chametz, that we can't have on Pesach. So on Pesach, they say, oh, Hashem will protect me, I won't take it. And as this source points out, that's stupid. You got to take your medicine. Now, with most cases, there are ways to get around it. Also, the rabbis across the board rule that medicine is not subject to the laws of food on Pesach. Why? Because medicine is not food. So if someone's going to be dumb, then there are going to be consequences for it. And now that does not mean that God does not protect us, does not love us, and that God doesn't do miracles. But if someone is going to be a fool and say, I'm just going to rely on miracles and I'm not going to have any common sense, God commanded you to have common sense. So while this here is about life or death and health and everything like that, I think it's also a great source showing that have a little bit of common sense. And again, the reality is that most people probably do have general common sense, but there's plenty of people. What is it? The Darwin Awards is this, I don't know if it's a website, but basically, I don't know if they do it anymore, but it used to be people doing the stupidest things you could ever possibly imagine. Like how many batteries could, you know it, Leon?
They still do it. There are still Darwin Awards given to people who do ridiculous things and end up dying as a result. So yes.
Yep. And I'll go back to what I said before. These people are God's creations. Why they do these stupid things? They're not malicious people. And maybe they weren't raised well. They didn't have access, whatever it was, but they made very poor decisions. But the point is, there are consequences for those decisions. And from one perspective, haha, it's so funny, but it's also deeply tragic. But the point here is that if you do something stupid, if a person does something stupid, there are consequences for it. And it doesn't matter how faithful they are. If they truly believe in God and God's Torah said, don't be a dummy. You got to have common sense. And again, while this is about health, it can apply to so many different areas. And there's a Hebrew word, seichel, or sechel, which means common sense, intellect. Have a little bit of common sense. And that would be just a good, valuable thing for all of us to have in all areas of our life. Any thoughts, comments, or questions on that source from the Sefer HaChinuch, the Book of Education? Excellent. So Gloria, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, and we're continuing on in this general section. So the next source here is Rav Kook. And again, he's one of my heroes. I was actually learning some sources of Rav Kook today, and just some of his ideas are just so beautiful. They can be seen as radical, but they really just recognize the need for Torah to adapt and for humanity to adapt to the world as it changes, that Torah was meant to grow. Torah was meant to evolve to the world it's living in. So this source here talks about going back to that tension between someone of perfect faith who truly knows that God created the world, but also sees all of these scientific things. And is it possible to hold both of those ideas simultaneously? And to someone like Rabbi Dinin, the answer is yes, but I'm not going to say, oh, because I'm so smart, I know you can do it. It's because of how Rav Kook, and even going back to Maimonides, the way that they've explained that ability to maintain both scientific knowledge and the faith in Torah and the spirituality. So go ahead, Gloria, please. Rav Kook, when a person suffers.
When a person suffers from a smallness of faith, it appears to that person that when people strive to strengthen their this worldly situation to fight against the problems that occur in the world, to acquire knowledge, might, beauty, organization, that all of this is external to the divine content in the world. Thus, a number of people who believe that they stand upon a divine basis are suspicious of all worldly progress. They hate culture, the sciences, political strategies, whether among Jews or non-Jews. But this is all a great error and a lack of faith. The pure outlook sees the divine appearance in every improvement of life, individual and general, spiritual and physical. It measures matters only according to the level of the usefulness that they have or the damage that they cause. Any movement that engaged in constructive creation, whether physical or spiritual, will never be an entirely negative movement. It may have imperfections, but everything in its totality is an element of the divine creation that is constantly acting. Not chaos did he create it, but that it be inhabited did he make it.
Excellent, thank you. So when people look at the stars and they say, wow, that's incredible, I don't believe in God anymore, why? Why couldn't God have created the stars? Again, if we look at the Torah and say, even if we say take things in the Torah literally, it's still possible for the Torah and science to be true, because the Torah is not always clear about what it literally means. So there's nothing explicit in the Torah that absolutely goes against the understanding of our world, and there's plenty of ways to understand it in line with science. But if someone says, oh, I've discovered atoms and physics and stuff like that, great. From the religious perspective, who do you think wrote all those rules? Who do you think created atoms? Who do you think gave you the capacity as a human being to have all these mathematical, scientific, artistic things? Oh, this beautiful music that Beethoven wrote, clearly it was from him. It couldn't be from God. I don't think anyone says that, because I think Beethoven himself, I don't know about his personal faith, but he certainly wrote a lot of religious music. But why would anyone say that? From a religious perspective, he was discovering this beautiful divine music that was already existent in the world. Now, Rav Kook is talking about something, a couple different things here, which is that if somebody gets so obsessed with the science, the music, and think that, oh, this has nothing to do with God, and perhaps replaces God, you don't need faith, you can rely on science and culture and politics, that's wrong thinking. But he's saying that you can use politics and science and culture to make the world a better place, and recognize that all of that comes from God. And then his final point is, as long as you're making the world a better, more beautiful, more divine, better, good place, great. If the secrets that you're discovering that go against God are hurting and destroying this world, then what you're doing is wrong. So if someone discovers a perfect political philosophy that's evil, that's wrong. But if someone discovers that democracy is better for the world, then someone says democracy is against the Torah, which it's not. Torah is actually quite democratic. Moshe set up a system of leadership and the Sanhedrin, et cetera, like that. But if there's a philosophy, a culture, an art, or science that makes the world a better place, then from Rav Kook's perspective and many others, that's actually bringing God out into this world. That's manifesting the divine. All of the most beautiful discoveries. Even though Einstein himself wasn't a religious Jew, his ability to make us understand the universe, to open up the secrets of the universe, allowed us to see God's plan. Now, again, a religious person would say, well, that's not what I see. That's not what Rav Kook's talking about. Rav Kook is talking to the people who want to be faithful, who want God, but also want to be able to have culture and science. And he's saying it's possible to have both. And ultimately, if you're saying, Rabbi, at what point do I know if this new philosophy, if this political thing, if this science is no longer godly, he'll say to you, is it making the world a better place? Is it creating order and beauty? And if your answer is no, it's not godly. If your answer is yes, this science is saving lives, is allowing people to discover new things and creating peace, then the answer is yes, there is godliness and divinity within that. So again, for the faithful who think, can I be a frum scientist? The answer is yes. And your goal shouldn't be about what you believe in the philosophy. It's, are you bringing good into this world? Because that is divinity, that is godliness. Any thoughts, comments, or questions on this source? Excellent. So the last source here was truly one of my favorite ones ever. I think it captures so much about the way I try and live my life. It relates to sort of everything I've given in this class, is questioning, is saying, what if I'm challenged by faith? What if I'm challenged by science? And if a rabbi says, you're excommunicated or be quiet, that doesn't benefit us in any way. Questions are the very core of our religion. And if there's no space for questions, then there's a big issue there. So this is from Rabbi Yehuda Betzalel, the Maharal, the leader of the Prague Jewish community. Supposedly he made the Golem. He did not, but it's a cool story. And in one of his works on, I don't want to say Jewish philosophy, but on thought in general, he writes, a person should not reject something which is against his own view. So this is speaking in many ways to teachers, but to everyone to some extent, especially if it is not presented as an attack on religion, but as simply an honest expression of the other person's belief. This is a great source you could put in a Haggadah when it comes to the four sons, the wicked son, when he's asking those questions. If it's an attack, then that's a problem. But it seems like the wicked son is genuinely asking a question. He's really challenged. Even if it is against his own religious beliefs and faith, he should not say, be quiet and shut your mouth, because there will not be a clarification of that person's religious understanding. If someone's genuinely challenged and we say to them, stop asking questions, then what they're going to do is just leave religion. If you don't validate them, if you say your question is bad and you're wrong, they're going to say, okay, I'm out of the shul, I'm out of the church, whatever it is. In fact, in such cases, we should tell a person to speak his mind freely or her mind freely and fully express how they feel, such that he should not feel that he has not been able to fully speak his mind. Now, we can disagree with them and try and convince them of a different thing, but that's having a conversation with them. If sincere questions are silenced, this is indicative that the religion is weak. Now, that is a radical, powerful, and I think a very true statement. Now, again, if somebody asks the question, Rabbi, how can the Torah say this when we know X? The answer could be, we don't know. We're not sure. That's a challenge, and we take it on faith. They may not be satisfied by that answer, but that's an honest answer. And it doesn't show that the religion is weak. Recognition that we don't know everything is very important. Again, even science knows we don't know everything. So if the religious question, we say, I'm not sure how to answer that question, let's explore it together. That shows that the religion is open to it and it's a place of strength. Saying I don't know is not a weak answer. Saying, quiet your mouth, how dare you question our religion or our leaders, that's a sign of fear and of weakness. This attitude is the opposite of what some people think. And you could go to the Maharal and say, what people are you talking about, Rabbi? And I'm sure everyone here can think about, not just in Judaism, leaders and groups and religions who present themselves this way. And then if you really push, you find out the reason they're pushing back is because they just don't have a good answer. When them saying, we're not sure, this is our faith, this is simply what we believe, is actually a very strong answer. Yeah, you don't have to agree with it, but it's coming from a place of honesty and sincerity. They mistakenly think that forbidding people from discussing religion strengthens religious faith, but this is not the case. Suppression of dissent and prohibiting people from speaking is a weakening of religion because it pushes people away. It shows them that you are not open to it, that you don't have any room for questions. And again, even if the answer is, I'm not sure, that's still an answer. It still validates the person because of a lot of religion is faith. And if the answer to someone is, we don't know, but we believe it, then they can make that choice about what they want to do, and it validates them as a person and their own struggles. And I think this not only is one of my favorite teachings, but it captures what I want to leave you all with, but so much of what I try to do is make space for those questions, but more importantly, empower people to find their own answers. Again, if you ask me, Rabbi, is it permitted to do this and that? I'll tell you what my thought is, my opinion, how I would rule. But if you say, Rabbi, I disagree, I'm not going to love you any less. I'm not going to say you're wrong. You say, Rabbi, explain to me why our tradition does this. I'll bring you the sources, but ultimately, if Judaism is to be strong, it has to be something that each of us chooses to embrace. Going back to the Torah on Mount Sinai, even though there was this sense that God said, choose that, God never actually said, choose this or die. God presented the Torah to the people, and it was clear that they as a people had to make a decision. And as much as now we've accepted as a people, we're born into it, men are circumcised, the reality is each and every day, every Jew has a choice of whether or not they want to accept God's Torah. And you ask me, well, what happens if they don't? They're not going to be struck down by lightning. That's not what God does. There are consequences for it if someone chooses to not be part of God's Torah, but those consequences are not a matter of life or death. It's missing an opportunity. If someone chooses to not be part of Judaism, they're not a bad person. They're not a bad person. And it doesn't mean they can't live a beautiful, fulfilling life of bringing so much wonder to this world, but they won't be part of a particular tradition. There's certain opportunities that they will miss. But it needs to be their choice. It needs to be their choice, because if they don't see that beauty, or if Judaism is forced upon them, then they'll never get the benefits of it. If Judaism is shoved down someone's throat, it doesn't matter if they keep all of the laws, they will get nothing out of it. But if a Jew, born a Jew, chooses to embrace Judaism, part of it or all of it doesn't matter. If it's their choice, then they will find the meaning in it. They'll find the community, they'll find the connection to God. But it has to come from them. And that's only going to happen if there's space for questions. And my role is to create that space for people, to give them the opportunity to find inspiration. Because if they find it on their own, because they're empowered, it's far more powerful than being forced on them. And again, the fact that God uses the language of choice, it's a recognition that God knows that too. God knows that our covenant, our mutual relationship, is only as meaningful as what we put into it.